silence tonight to the memory of Harmon Mitchell, our former school board member who passed away on September 1st. Harmon cared deeply about Rockford Public Schools and enjoyed the 6 years he served on this board, and he will be missed. So take a moment. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. The coordinator call the roll.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Dr. Harner?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
With 6 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We do not have media students here, but I'm sure our broadcast will be perfect. We are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting when we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government as well as provides freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates according to this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and conduct our meeting in an efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. We just have one speaker tonight, so I will call her up, and we do have the clock on the wall to help you with your timing. So our first speaker tonight is Allison Wang.
Good evening, everyone. So according to the news release recently from 2010 to 2015, the district's average ACT score has increased from 17.8 to 18.5. It is great news that the current average student is able to answer 2 to 4 more questions in each section correctly than students in 2010 could. But just from a mathematician's point of view, I cannot quite understand how these numbers were computed. As many have said before, the point is not to be complacent. While the district's ACT scores increased 0.7 points over the past 5 years, it is still significantly below average. Additionally, if ACT scores are going to be one of the marks of how well students are performing, then perhaps the district should publish the full statistical measurements as to how these scores were computed, including standard deviations, as well as sample or population sizes, as well as the individual school performances and different student groups from certain schools. If certain areas can be identified, then more resources can be diverted into these specific areas in order to improve everyone. This way, the public can be fully aware of the exact measurements that are being used as targets as which areas need much improvement. My point is that public education is meant for equal opportunity for every student, and poor performing students on the spectrum should be as much as counted as the high performing students are. Thanks.
Thank you, Allison. Are there any board member comments at this time? Mr. Connor?
Yep, I'd like to say in memoriam to Harmon Mitchell, he was a wonderful man. He was an outstanding public servant and really made a difference in the Rockford Public Schools. So I really, in his memory, really want to say what a great job he did.
Okay, thank you. Any other board member comments? Okay. We'll move then to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following consent items: the meeting minutes of August 25th, 2015, purchase orders, payroll, accounts payable, construction bid pay requests, contracts under $10,000, and travel. The recurring contracts of certified speech language pathologist Hannah Miller and Lindy Leonard. The other consent items include the settlement agreement, the recommendation for salary adjustment for general counsel, the recommendation for salary adjustment for superintendent, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Are there any items that, consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson?
7E, F,
7E and F, okay.
9B, C.
9B and C, okay. So 7E and F and 9B and C. Any others? Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of consent items not pulled.
Ms. Jackson,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
And I'll take a motion and a second to approve the consent item 7E, the construction bid pay request.
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? Ms. Jackson?
Yep. May someone please speak to this? I don't recall seeing this before, but it doesn't mean that it's not been on the agenda. And what it is exactly that we're being asked to vote on.
The construction list that you have there, what we're trying to do is we were having some issues with getting those payments paid in a timely fashion in accounts payable. It's really tough on the construction group to get all their paperwork in as we need it as a timely basis and trying to hit those board meetings. So what we've done is they're looking at what they're anticipating for the month, and that's when they get the, what do I want to call it, when they turn in the AIA document, that's the dollar amount, but doesn't have all the payment, the backup documentation behind it. So we're wanting you to approve that, so then when we get that documentation, we can cut those checks for them on a timely basis, so we can make sure that we hit those deadlines. It's tough getting all those AIA documents and all the waivers of lien and everything. So we want to make sure that we have all of that information before we cut a check. And so it's been trying to make sure those timings, and a couple times we've had some issues with getting the paperwork and missing it by a day or two. So instead of having people wait since it's such a large dollar amount, we want to make sure that we're getting them their payments timely.
Who is we? We meaning the district is having?
The we meaning the accounts payable department, and just making sure that some of those payments are taking much longer than anticipated, and this was one way we found that would help them. And we've done this, we did this just at the last board meeting as well, that was approved at the last board meeting. So nothing goes out, that's the up to amount.
It is for work that has been completed.
Yes, the work is completed, the documents are there, but again, we don't release any payments unless we have all of the information we need, all the waivers of lien, the certified payrolls and all of that. So until we get that information, we don't like to release the payments, and so we're waiting for that. And it's kind of an odd timing issue, and for them to wait all those weeks to get that paperwork in, sometimes it's a timing issue.
So who are you getting the paperwork from that you're waiting? Is that from the district, or is it from the construction company?
Both. Because it takes a while to get the liens from where they need to, the construction company. It takes time for them to get that to us, and then it takes time for our guys to go through all the paper, because there's quite a bit of paper for each payment that's responsible. So it takes a long time for that. And for them to try and hit our deadlines, the timing it takes quite a bit of time.
So are you looking at any other process improvement, or is this it?
Well, this is one piece of it, and we're trying to get this kind of for me, this is sort of like an interim piece to the puzzle, and we are looking at other ways to do this. But we wanted to get something done so that, especially during these summer months, when there's all this construction going on, we need to make sure that we hit these payments.
Okay. Any other questions? Now I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the construction bid pay request.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson. The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, now I'll take a motion and a second to approve the contracts under 10,000, which is item 7F.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Questions or discussion? Okay, have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of 7F, the contracts under 10,000.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson, Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, now I'll take a motion for item 9B, which is the recommendation for salary adjustment for general counsel.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Rollins, second by Mr. Connor. Any questions or discussion? Have the coordinator call the roll then on the approval of 9B.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Now I'll take a motion and a second then for the approval of item 9C, which is the recommendation for salary adjustment for superintendent.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Rollins. Questions or discussion? The coordinator will call the roll.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Okay, we're now on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the following items: the appointment of Ryan Olodek as the 10-month assistant principal. I believe that was at East. Appointment of Craig Ecker as 12-month special education administrator. The appointment of Aaron Pittman as 12-month director of special education, and the HR organizational report and professional development report. And the closed session consent items in which student discipline, which expelled or suspended students are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. The following students have been granted a conditional probationary agreement: IEA-1-EG, IEA-2-VS. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. Are there any items that board members would like to have pulled for separate consideration? Ms. Jackson?
10 you can pull the entire thing,
Okay,
and then 11. Both.
so that leaves nothing to be voted on, right, in the closed session. So now I'll take a motion then to approve items under 10, which are the 3 appointments and the HR report.
So moved.
Moved by Mr.
Second.
Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. There is no discussion. So have the coordinator call the roll of the approval of items 10A, B, C, and D.
Ms. Jackson,
No.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor.
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
And I'll take a motion and a second for the items listed under 11, the student discipline cases.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Dr. Harner. No discussion. Have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch.
Yes.
Dr. Harner,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Jackson.
Abstain.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 abstain.
Okay, thank you. We are now on to the next agenda item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano. I also would like to reiterate the board's kind words about Harmon Mitchell, great loss to the district, and I wanted to extend my gratitude for his service as well. He'll be greatly missed. On another note, there are a number of important financial items coming up in terms of the process of building our budget for FY16, and we have an important meeting to review sales tax as a possibility on Thursday evening. To give a brief overview, I wanted to cede my time to Mr. McConaughey.
Yes, on the sales tax and also on the revenue side, there are several timely considerations that we'll be looking at. And of course, our job is to review all of the various options and report back to the board with every possible option that you might be interested in considering. Therefore, we're doing research on the sales tax issue. We're doing research on the way we collect and distribute levies, and we'll be preparing reports for you on those various options as they become available.
Education Committee has not met since our previous board meeting. Will be here in this room next Tuesday night at 5:30.
The Operations Committee did meet here on Tuesday, September 1st at 5:30 PM. We listened to a presentation on the strategic plan from Dr. Weistman, similar to the presentation that he had previously given to the Education Committee. We had some discussion, particularly around some of the facilities goals and strategies, and he took that input back to the administrative team. We received a report from Mr. Schmidt on our facilities usage for rentals. It was broken down into 3 categories: private entities other than the park district, and then school-related activities. So for the private entities other than the park district, we charged a total of a little over $43,000 in rent in fiscal year 15. For the park district, we have that overarching intergovernmental agreement in place. The value of the facilities usage that we provided to them last fiscal year was about $126,000, and Mr. Schmidt indicated that the administration would be in discussions with the Park District to make sure we were doing that in accordance with the IGA that we have with them. And then there is no dollar amount given for the student or the school organizations. There was some discussion, it wasn't clear from the report, even on the listing of the private organizations. A lot of those showed 0, but were not board waivers. So there were questions from the committee about why that was. There were some explanations given for some of them, but I think Mr. Schmidt and his team agreed that the report probably needs to be cleaned up and further explanation given on some of those. There was also a little bit of a discussion at the committee about whether we are really undercharging for the use of our facilities and whether we're really capturing the true wear and tear on our facilities. So Mr. Schmidt was there for that and heard that, and where is he? He's here somewhere. There he is. So hopefully he'll take that under advisement as well. There was further discussion about the update to the water connection agreement with Marsh School. The city's not budging. So Marsh School is not in the city. It's it's one of those little pockets that's never been annexed into the city. And it has, when it was first hooked up to the city's water system, as part of hooking up to the city's water system, the city charges anybody who is outside the limits, the city limits, double the normal water rate. They've been doing that with Marsh School, and they are going to continue doing that with Marsh School, and it's pretty clear that they're not going to budge on that. So that was the report. We are going to have to, at some point, enter into an agreement with the city to cover that so that we can move forward with Marsh School. We received an update on the BMO Harris lease. That's on the agenda under new items tonight, so we'll get a report on that. And then the administration brought to us under other, sort of for informational and sort of just to get input from the committee, the pharmacy benefit management RFP that they've gone out with. They want to, I believe, the process is such that they really need to bring that to us, at least for a first reading, before the next operations committee. So what they really wanted to do was come to us and give a report about the process that they're using for selecting a vendor, see whether anybody had any concerns or any input into that process. There was some discussion about it, but I think on the whole there weren't any real concerns expressed about the process that they were using. So I would expect, I think they were actually getting close to a conclusion to that process, even at the operations committee, and I would expect that we would expect to see for first reading a proposed vendor at our next board meeting. That was it for the operations committee. Our next meeting is here in this room on October 6th at 5:30 p.m.
Could you, those numbers again with the Park District on the facilities usage, what, and what, how it is out of compliance with our policy, or is it with
Well,
the intergovernmental agreement?
The value that's been put on the usage for fiscal year 15 was $126,000. So as you recall, under the IGA, allows colloquially for the school district and the park district to horse trade. And so the question is, they need to sit down and do a reconciliation and make sure that the administration feels like it's gotten an equivalent value from the park district in fiscal year 15.
What was the 40,000 number?
The 43,000 is what we actually charged and collected from private organizations for the use of our facilities in fiscal year 15.
And so the process going forward, Dr. Jarrett, then, is yet reevaluated every year, the facilities, and whether or not we feel that that we're covering our use or based on the recommendation of this committee, what will happen moving forward?
So I attended the meeting, and I think there were two takeaways. One is, and I think the large issue is going to be cleaning up the report and making sure everything is calculated in a way that's clear and understandable and consistent with the policy. So I think the group got real clear feedback. The second issue would be, as planned, we'll need to make sure we conduct a reconciliation with the Park District. I'm not aware of any concerns that we have in terms of that working out. So a third point that Mr. Rollins made that I think was really important to take into consideration was the continued look at events that are being rented, even if a rental fee is charged, when it is a for-profit type event. I think there was some type of a weightlifting competition that was cited by one of the committee members as an example, that the one thing we do need to be in consideration, that we don't want a taxing body to essentially be in competition with private entities that would rent those for profit. So in a sense, their own tax dollars could be used to create competition. So I think that was a third point that I think we wanted to make sure we address. So my understanding and expectation is that Mr. Schmidt and his team will clean up the report, reconcile with the Park District, and take a hard look at any for-profit usage of the facilities to see if there's additional room to increase the pricing difference in terms of nonprofits and profits. The committee seemed very supportive of the idea of true nonprofits renting our facilities at a reduced rate and in the spirit of community collaboration, but there seemed to be strong consensus that it was really in bad form for us to do anything that was remotely below market rate for somebody who was going to profit through the use of our facilities.
So, and I'm sorry to ask this publicly, but I don't ever remember finding out the final answer. Did the bobsled team pay us for use of our stadium?
No, not yet.
Okay. Mr. Connor, you had a question?
No, I would just
Or
say,
comment.
I'm sorry?
Or a comment?
Oh,
Okay.
yes. Dr. Jarrett got it well, the notes. The one I would emphasize is, especially for profit-making organizations, the way the policy is structured today, I don't believe essentially goes after the market rate for private organizations. And so, again, Dr. Jarrett got it right, but I would emphasize that we need to have an understanding, at least some sense of the market rates, so that if there are private organizations that want to use our facilities, that we don't want to be in competition, as he well said, with tax-paying bodies.
Okay. Mr. Rollins, anything else for operations?
No.
Okay, thank you. And your next meeting is probably in October?
October 6th at 5:30 PM.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Harner, the Facility Plan Oversight Committee?
Has not met since the last meeting, and our meeting will be next Tuesday, September 15th at 7 p.m.
Okay.
4th floor, Superintendent's Conference Room.
Same night as the Education Committee. Right following, okay. We are now on to the action items for tonight. Our first action item is the Board Policy Revision 8.20 Community Relations, Community Use of School Facilities. This was presented by Attorney Hoadley last board meeting. Is there a motion and a second to approve
So moved.
those revisions? Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second. Any questions or discussion on the board policy revisions to 8.20? Ms. McCullough.
I'd like to propose an amendment
Okay.
to have the figure read 5,000.
I'll second.
Motion, there's a second. Any question or discussion on that amendment to that motion? Ms. Jackson?
So I guess, what's the process for the waiver then? What's the process for that if someone submits a waiver? Because they currently can submit waivers now. It's the same process, right? They want to have the fee waived.
Yes, per board policy, potential fee waivers are put into 3 categories, and there are groups that qualify according to that policy. What this board amendment, my understanding of it, would allow is discretion where if an exchange of services occurs that is either done in an untimely manner where it's very time sensitive, or if it occurs in a manner where it is not as clear of an exchange of services, then I would have as superintendent discretion up to $5,000 in a fiscal year to look at those types of exchanges. So I think the only thing that would come into play would be in the very rare circumstances that we want to do this and a time frame was not met, but we still felt like it was in the best interest of the district to do so, or unsure whether the board would support the approval of it because it was less clear. I would have some very, very limited discretion.
Okay, in the red line, it says that such waivers will be consistent with the criteria put in place by the superintendent. Where is that? Has that criteria been put in place, or?
I'm going to use the same criteria. I'm going to follow the board. I'm going to adhere to the board policy.
Mr. Connor?
Well, we had talked about 10,000 last time. I'm not sure why we reduced it to 5. It's a small amount in our budget. From my point of view, the original intention was that if there are legitimate community groups that want to use school facilities and don't necessarily have in-kind services, that this gives some options, for my point of view, to support community organizations more. Not sure why we would reduce it, so definitely not in favor of this.
Mr. Rollins?
Well, the 10,000, Mrs. Hoadley at the last meeting had actually said that she just came up with that on her own and that she had no basis for it. That's not exactly what she said, but she said she came up with it on her own. So 10,000 would be a quarter of the rental income that we collected in the last fiscal year, and I just think that's too high of a percentage. And I do kind of want to hold the administration's feet to the fire. One of the reasons we did this policy and we've done this rental policy is to try to get people to understand, people including the administration, that this is real money. This is money that in fiscal year 15, I mean the total between the Park District and the private, if we didn't charge for that private, that would be about $200,000. You know, that's a real number. $10,000 is a real number. Last year, and I don't know if it's been restored, but we cut all our building budgets. There are other uses for this money. And so I would really like to hold the administration's feet to the fire to say we need to make real decisions about whether we're going to use the money to support community organizations, allowing them to use our schools, or if we're going to use the money in the classrooms, in the buildings, and for educating children. So I'd like to keep the number as low as possible, but give the administration some discretion.
I had a question. Of the 43, I don't know if you or maybe Mr. Schmidt would know the answer. Of the 43,000 that was collected, how many events was that for? Was that 5, 10, roughly?
I mean,
Yeah.
here's the spreadsheet, and it goes onto a second page.
Okay, so it's quite a few.
It's quite a few.
It's quite, it's not 2 or 3 or whatever. It's probably 30 or something like that, maybe.
Right.
I was trying to get a handle on what the average charge would be. You know, is it $1,000? Is it $500? Or is it somewhere in there? But it sounds like it's probably a pretty small amount then for an average.
Yeah, I mean, the average charges look like they're, most of them are in the hundreds.
Okay, so under 1,000.
There's a
probably.
few that are in the 1,000. There are a couple that are in the 2,000 range.
I was trying to get a handle on how many how many events would cover $5,000 versus $10,000. Go ahead, Mr. Schmidt.
Based on that, from the fiscal year 15, we had nonprofit groups 46, Park District 24, and in-house school activities 121. So 46 for nonprofit groups, 24 for the Park District, and 121 for Rockford School District.
Okay.
And then build contracts, 54.
I'm not sure who is next. Ms. McCulloch?
Yeah, so part of my thought in reducing it was the ones that we've seen come to the board where in-kind contributions were not necessarily readily in place as far as the board considered from a policy perspective, have been fairly small ones, people just using a building for, an hour or 2 hours. So what we're looking at is trying to help those groups through as compared with trying to help somebody bring a full program in that needs a building for, a week long at, multiple thousands of dollars. So this just helps with those groups who don't have any money, but, it's a smaller one. So that was part of the reason for my suggestion.
Mr. Connor?
I certainly understand that $10,000 is real money, but from my point of view, I don't know if it's holding the administration's feet to the fire or if we're going to reach out to more community groups. I think there's no doubt that we did not improve the buildings just so anybody could do anything, but most of the groups that have been coming through to ask for the usage of the buildings has been community-related in the neighborhoods, and so I would say, from my point of view, I think it's not that much of a difference in a budget our size, and the issue that I would see is we need to charge a lot more for any private groups or turn them down. And the other part is that there may be more money that should have been charged this year, so that the 40,000 might have been a little low overall. So I understand the point, and if it came down to it, of course I would accept 5,000 rather than nothing, but my point is the same. I think we're making a point to the public, which is we are trying to reach out to the community groups, and from my point of view, that's an important part of education, is making sure the community groups feel welcome to come in, and especially if it's education related and development of the areas, I think that's important.
Coordinator, call the roll on the amendment that Mrs. McCulloch made to reduce the amount to $5,000.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
No.
Ms. Jackson? Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
So then we now need a roll call on the vote to approve the policy revision as amended.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Dr. Harner?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Jackson? No. Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes with 5 yeses and 1 no.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. We are now on to new business. Mrs. Cyrus, a speech language pathologist agreement.
This really isn't anything new,
Okay. Just a different name. Okay.
but it's under new business because this is an individual we've used in the past, but we haven't had a contract for this speech pathologist since 2012, 11-12 school year. So enough time had passed that Ms. Hoadley and I figured it wasn't a recurring contract, so we brought it through as new business. This particular contract with the other two that you already approved totals another 1.0 FTE. So if you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about 3.4 vacancies. So when this goes through 2 weeks from now, we'll be down to 2.4 vacancies remaining. So there'll probably be more speech and language contracts coming through. If anyone has any questions.
So this is for 2 days of coverage a week.
It is for 2, yes.
Questions? Okay, this will come for a vote at our next board meeting on September 22nd. Mr. Schmidt is going to present our final item under new business, which is the amendment to the BMO lease agreement.
Yes, you were handed out tonight red line copy of the amendment to the BMO lease. BMO is exercising their option to extend their lease for 3 more years. Part of that, though, is they would only extend it for the first floor. They won't extend it for the second floor. So as we looked at it, we made some changes. Their rentable square foot goes down to 21,576 from the current 39,102. They're paying for the construction or their proportionate share, which goes down to 17.79% from 32.24% of any renovations that we have in the building that the board previously approved is the demising wall and some of the security entrances and the vestibules in the front and the back to accommodate vacating the second floor and turning that over to the district. That brings it to the rent here. The first 5 years of the rent that we've collected from the BMO Harris Bank is about $1.1 million. This will extend it for another 3 years. That'll give us approximately a little over $500,000 in additional rent.
Any questions for Mr. Schmidt? So it's been a wise investment in this building, I think. Yes. Okay, so this will be presented for a vote on our September 22nd board meeting. Are there any other new business items or agenda recommendations? I have a couple announcements. I'm sorry, just a reminder to board members that September 16th at 6:30 p.m. is our board vacancy applicant interview sessions that will be held in this room beginning at 6:30 p.m. And we have, as of today, 5 applicants. The deadline for submitting applications is Friday. So if there's anyone out there in the community that's interested in applying for the Subdistrict G board position, get that in by Friday. Our Ms. Fromm will get all the applications to us to review before then. So I have sent all of you the questions that you can use, and you can use additional ones as well. This will be an open, round-robin type interview. So that's September 16th at 6:30 p.m. And the other reminder I wanted to remind everyone about is our next Saturday board retreat will be October 17th. So make sure that's on your calendars as well. And we'll be doing strategic plan updates and things like that. So we haven't put the agenda together yet, but that'll be one of the key items, will be the strategic plan updates. Any other further business?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 7:40 p.m.